Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
When we were preparing for this week's program, we thought, are all of our current unease and challenges to get along about bifurcated politics? Is it about so many people with so many problems just lacking consensus? Or is it as simple as a vacuum of benevolent, constructive leadership? Welcome again, and thank you for supporting the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. Jack Kemp said that the purpose of politics is not to defeat your opponent as much as it is to provide superior leadership and better ideas. And JFK said leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So whether it is about North Carolina bathroom bill or South Carolina's threat to not address the critical need of transportation, leadership plays the most crucial role. Not coincidentally, later on, we are joined by a man that has moved from the corporate C-suite to organically growing the Palmetto State's most important leaders. Stay with us, please.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Tim Mabe of the High Point Convention and Visitors Bureau, Otis Roll from the Greater Lexington Chamber and Visitors Center, and special guest Hayne Hipp, co-founder of Liberty Fellowship.
Hello, welcome to our program. Gentlemen, welcome. Odie, good to have you back. Tim, welcome.
Glad to be here.
You know, let's talk about this for a second. So, drill down into the North Carolina House Bill 2 about, it's called the bathroom bill or whatever is going back and forth on transportation in the State House in Columbia. Odie, let's start with you. What are we missing in this dialogue that is important to talk about because we can't see past some of the passion around the politics and the acrimony about, one side pointing fingers at the other side? What is really getting lost here?
Well, I think it's all about election politics more than it is anything, Chris. People have lost sight about what they go to Columbia or really even get involved in politics for, and that's to solve problems, to create jobs and create wealth and create a path forward for our citizens and for our state. Mm-hmm. And I think what they've gotten wrapped around axle on is getting reelected rather than going to Columbia and saying, let's do the right thing for the state that's going to be meaningful for the next 20 or 30 years. Let's provide a future. And what's happening, particularly in South Carolina, I think our state legislative leaders are advocating their position and driving all the decisions back down to our local governments who are really stressed out, particularly on the financial side. They're having to address the roads issues themselves rather than it being done at the state level, which I believe is one of the core functions of state government is our infrastructure system. So you've got this whole political thing, whether it's at the local level, at state level, at the federal level, where nobody really wants to, there's no accountability in the system. And in a lot of ways, we're lacking those leaders that really want to stand up and be accountable for moving South Carolina forward. It wasn't always that way. I think back in the early 70s and 80s, we had 10 or 12, 15 leaders that went around our banks and our manufacturers that legislative leaders listened to. Now it's more about collaborative efforts and trying to get things done. People's got so many different ideas that it just breaks down, and we don't have people to fill in that void right now and say, hey guys, hey gals, we got to get it fixed.
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting term. Tim, are we seeing a breakdown of political leadership? And I'm talking about when you look at the General Assembly in North Carolina, it has made your job somewhat harder. Is this a breakdown of leadership, or is this politics as usual? Is it worse than it is? And what are we missing not doing by being focused on some of these issues that turn into real passion plays?
Well, what Otis and I do is about business. Hospitality is big business in North Carolina. Last year it was $22 billion is what it meant to the economy. So bills like HB2, while there's a lot of opinions about that, is it the right thing to do, as Otis mentioned, becomes about principle. It's not much about business. As a matter of fact, things that are not good for business probably shouldn't be done. If we were running a large corporation, that would be one of the things that we would ask: is this good for business? Is it going to bring us more money? Is it going to help us grow? If it would not do that, then it would be a very simple thing for the board to say, we're not going to do that. We're going to act in a different way. So I think that I would encourage all leaders that go into the political arena to think more about businessmen.
Is it, you know, I don't want to go down too far down this rabbit hole, but we can't look at everything through the lens of business. I mean, there's got to be some sensible dialogue somewhere in here. And that's a leading comment as much as it's a question, Odie.
Well, I think there is some sensible dialogue. I think the issues themselves get elevated where people are thinking in the right direction. But I will tell you, Chris, I think that the biggest issue facing us is everybody fails to recognize that we've got to spend money to be economically viable in a global economy. And for us, it's as simple as trying to decide whether we want to put a dime's worth of tax on each gallon of gasoline sold in the state to make our infrastructure viable, where companies that are looking at South Carolina from not only outside our boundaries but outside our country, can they get their goods to market? And I think we've got to sit there and pass some type of revenue, and we're talking about a $29 billion problem over the next 20 years that needs to be reconciled.
And you're talking about transportation and roads.
That's it.
South Carolina.
That's it.
In North Carolina, Tim, do things like transportation and education end up being eclipsed by some bare-knuckle blood sport politics that we see now?
Well, yes, it could. To answer that, the federal government just came back this week and said, you know, that HB2 is, you're going to have to take it off the table, or you could get sued and you will lose a lot of money coming from the federal government for education. Education would be one of the primary losers for that. And to me, the decision is going to be with the elected officials whether they're willing to take that loss to education on principle of what they believe for HB2.
Do you think they're going to relent?
Well, they haven't shown any signs so far, but I think that eventually they probably will have to.
Yeah, okay. Gentlemen, thanks. We're going to bring our guest on, who I'm sure will have some opinions about leadership and how it kind of dovetails into this dialogue. Coming up next week on this program, you know, it's always good to check in with tourism. Tourism is one of the largest industries, if not the largest revenue producer in North and South Carolina, and it is the season. Next week on this program, we have them back together. His name is Whit Tuttle. Whit is the Director of Tourism and Marketing for the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, which is a division of the Chamber, for the Department of Commerce in North Carolina. And Dwayne Parrish, longtime Director of South Carolina, what's called South Carolina PRT, Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. They'll both be here next week talking about tourism and talking about what outsiders think about the Carolinas and how that impacts how we think about ourselves. Remember the 2000 Robinson Crusoe-esque movie Castaway? Starred Tom Hanks about a go-go executive whose life zigged when the rest of the world zagged. He ended up alone, discarded on a desert island for years. Well, as the story goes, after returning to civilization, he was much more sensitive, introspective, and intentionally thoughtful about everything. Well, our guest may not have crash landed or ended up on a desert island, but seemingly has gone through a transformation of similar sorts, from a high corporate environment to more of a leadership sensei. And in doing so, he has raised an army of Palmetto State leaders whose reach is far beyond the Carolinas. He is the co-founder of the Liberty Fellowship, with partnerships extending to the Aspen Institute and Wofford College, to mention just a couple. We welcome to this program Hayne Hipp. Mr. Chairman, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Delighted to be here.
You know, Hayne, I want to make note of this. That was an abbreviated introduction, because the things that you have done at Liberty Corp, that your family, that your father, that your family has done, are almost too numerous to mention. So it almost doesn't do you justice by the way that we bring into this dialogue. But you do have a certain passion and an interest in leadership. The first question is the same thing that we opened with, Hayne. What are we missing by getting bogged down, and I use that term intentionally, in the politics and in the minutia of day-to-day here?
Yeah. And Chris, I would call it divisiveness and polarization. And what would happen if you could take South Carolina or North Carolina and begin to think about, how could I bring together a group of people with the just society in mind, with economic development opportunities for all, with fairness, with trust, with inclusiveness. All the things that Thomas Jefferson wrote about in the Declaration of Independence, Martin Luther King, that was his sermon, and you brought them together over a period of time. Let's take in our case 21 months, 5 seminars, Socratic roundtable discussions, starting with the classics, Aristotle, Socrates, Locke, Hobbes, and you move them forward to where they represented a mosaic, a diversity of opinions, a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of voices, a wide range of thought. And in that intense atmosphere, they began to not only hear themselves, but they began to hear the others who had a different perspective, the realities that they live in. And through a period of time, you could break down, let's call it those silos of arrogance. And collectively, you could begin to have a strategic impact as people stepped out of their own world and said, let's think about, again, the just society. What can we do together to move South Carolina forward, to move North Carolina forward? And so, that's the genesis of Liberty Fellowship.
Well, and you know, you explained it so well. So how do you, it sounds great, and I know it works, but how do you get them to take that outside of the safe environment of the Liberty Fellowship, of that little laboratory that they get, excuse me for saying this, worked up in? Yeah. And how do you get them to apply that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, importantly, South Carolina is not a state, and actually North Carolina isn't, just a little bit bigger. We're both communities. So after we go through our seminars and we go back to our jobs, we're going to run into each other everywhere. And you have built that trust, what the fellows call a red light conversation. You can talk candidly and openly with a Liberty Fellow and know that there will be confidentiality. So as two legislators, one party, the other party, are talking, they know it's not going to be manipulated. As two business people are talking with a nonprofit or talking again with the legislators, they know that there's confidentiality, and they understand the obligation to make South Carolina a better place for all. Everybody who's nominated is interviewed, and we're looking for those who have a lifetime commitment to South Carolina. Otis?
Hayne, first of all, I want to thank you for being a mentor for me for all these years from the first time we met.
And you did a good job.
Well, thank you very much. I think the real question for me was, what was the genesis behind starting Liberty Fellows? I mean, we've talked about this through the years, and we've talked about Void and how it came about. Talk a little bit about what the genesis was for Liberty Fellows.
I don't have an hour-long program, but I will say we were sitting there and coming back to the small community. What if we could make an investment directly into the bloodstream of our leaders? And you know, we talk about ROI. We all have been in business. And instead of using a return on investment, what if we talked about an ROP, a return on people? And if we could bring those groups together, and our average age is 42. You have to be nominated, but we accept nominations from 30 to 45. But it is an older crowd of proven leaders, and we gave them that opportunity to come together and have those discussions, because almost all of the Liberty Fellows, regardless of their background, whether they are committed, they're looking for a platform, who we are, where we're going, how we're going to get there. And all we did at the right time came up and said, here's a platform, folks. Y'all get together and let's see what we can do. And the seminars are moderated by Aspen Institute trained moderators, but a good moderator only talks 10 to 15% of the time. And you can watch over the period of time. In the first early days, there's not that intensity. But once they begin to break down those silos of arrogance, the magic happens. And they begin to think, how are we going to move this state forward? And what's the best way to do it?
Well, we'll just follow up on that, Chris. I know that each one of these Liberty Fellows are required to do a project as a result of being in there. Can you talk a little bit of just what type of projects they're working on and the value that they're already adding just from these projects that they're working on?
Yeah, that's good. Each of the fellows, in addition to the seminars, and they never graduate, because, as I said, we're looking for lifetime commitment. Each of them has a mentor from the senior business leadership, as you were, and then each of them has a project that has to have the potential to have a statewide impact. Now, with 247 Liberty Fellows, there are 247 projects. Yep. Some of them have been home runs, some of them are still languishing. Some of them we're asking new Liberty Fellows to pick up a project that was done in Buford by an architect, and she started a trail. That trail is now probably 25 miles long. Right. They have a summer festival there. So someone's doing the same thing in Spartanburg, someone's doing the same thing in Rock Hill. There were no interpreters in the court system for Spanish. So one of them took on the project of how do we bring Spanish interpreters into the South Carolina Justice Department. But they're all over everywhere. I mean, I got a book that big. Yep. You trying to find a project to do, come see us. We got one that you can dust off and run
exactly.
with. Thank you.
Thank you. Question?
Yeah. You know, I like the term that you use, silos of arrogance. I think I can connect with that. But you know, when you were at Wachovia for years ago in Winston-Salem under the leadership of Bud Medlin, Bud had a great leadership style that brought people together. And I had to think about him and some of the things that you said. I admire and commend you on your project that you have going on in South Carolina. Well,
and John Medlin and Bud were both heroes to me. They both did great jobs.
Yeah. Let me come back to something. So you've got this brand of Liberty Fellowship that grows these leaders. You go upstream and you hope all of this is going to filter downstream.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you take your brand as a way to give, as you said, it's a safe place, it's a confidential place to differ and to discover each other's point of view? Why wouldn't you do that and apply it to some of the politics of the day?
I think they are being applied. First of all, we're non-political, non-partisan, non-dogmatic, so I can't talk politics. But I would say, my guess is because there are a number of legislators in the system, there are a number of judges in the system at the state and the federal level. So I'm sure that the politicians have those discussions, and they've had the experience of the personal transformation, the awakening inside the individual, but now they can move to collective strategic impact. And I think because of their feelings in this, that those discussions are going on in a nonpartisan way among those who are partisan.
So in 2004, your first class graduates.
Okay, it actually was 2006. First class came in 2004, 2 years of seminars.
So when you compare that, the success of that class, I'm not even sure what that means, but the outcome of that class versus the classes now, what is the striking difference in your mind?
There's no real striking difference. I think what we realized is that there are a lot of people, and I hate to be redundant, but there are a lot of people in South Carolina, and I know they're here in North Carolina, who care deeply, but they don't have a place. They can go talk to their friends at X, but they can't talk to X, Y, and Z. And so all of those who are in, there's certainly more awareness. The intensity of the interviews are greater. We get about 100 to 110 nominated each year. We take 20 a year. And we have about 400 who've been nominated that we keep up with until they age out at 46, because we're always waiting to see who can fit into the mosaic. You can't have a great symphony with only the 10, 20 world-class violinists. You have to have north, south, white, black, conservative, liberal. You have to have that mosaic for that magic to happen.
Well, Hayne, I know in the last couple months or so, y'all had a big meeting to talk about the future of Liberty Fellowship.
Yeah.
What does it look like? What does it look like to you? What does it look like to the people that's gone through it? Because I think you could see some changes and more involvement. So what are we to expect?
Well, I think, first of all, everyone who's a Liberty Fellow, at the end of their seminars, they get a stock certificate, Liberty Fellowship. Just looks like Liberty Corp in Wachovia. Yeah. And so they're shareholders. And 2 years ago, we did an evaluation. We interviewed 160. We had a consultant do it, fellows, and about 70 of the mentors. And the fellows said, we're ready to run it. So we had began a transition in 2014. And now our founding executive director has moved to a consultant role. We have a new executive director who is president and CEO, Lou Ann Runge, who is in the 4th class, was a partner at Gallivan White and Board. And we are transitioning. What we're saying is we're moving from the aging founders to the Liberty Fellows running. And that's the mark of success. Right. Because if the aging founders hang around and then all of a sudden they die and it falls apart, then the magic wasn't there. Right. And they're excited about it. We've just finished up. We've got bylaws, principles and standards, board. It's very alive and very vibrant, and I think it's going to only grow in strength because of the respect that they have for each other and because of their commitment to South Carolina.
No question.
Tim, question?
Well, it sounds like that you're bringing a lot of folks together and celebrating a lot of diversity and utilizing that to try to move things forward for the future. I commend you on that.
Well, and I'm not bringing them together. I'm trying to get out of the way because, as Gandhi said, I got to hurry because my people are leaving me. These folks are doing fine, and as we fade into the sunset, I think it's just exciting to see what's happening. So there's a real enthusiasm.
What can we learn from diversity, especially given the backdrop of what we talk about these days?
You can't build a family. You can't build a business. You can't build a community. You can't build a state centered on exclusiveness, on all the. You've got to learn how to and appreciate and understand and appreciate those different perspectives. You have to have a mosaic of all of that in order to build anything of substance. Otherwise, you've got 20% or 80% of the people standing out on the outside, and you're seeing it in Trump. Trump is calling to that 30 or 40% that is so angry because they have been totally excluded from the process. And you can't do that. I mean, you see it in local politics. You see it inside companies.
So excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Chairman. So you're not talking about tolerance. I mean, tolerance infers that kind of putting up with it. You're talking about something different.
Yeah. There's a great quote that came out of the interviews where, and I know the individual who said it, who would be, I don't want to say left wing or right wing, but would have a fairly narrow set of perspectives when that person came in the program. And that person said, the person I'm closest to in my class is the one least like me because I now see the world through different lenses. That made me cry. That was powerful.
You know, it has taken us so long to have you sit down with us. We're so glad you did.
Thank you.
And I hope you'll come back. Would you please come back soon and continue these?
But you know what my dog and pony show is going to be.
Well, that's okay. We need more of it.
All right.
Thank you. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the program. Tim, welcome. Good luck in the High Point and the Triad. Odie, we're glad you showed back up because you disappeared for about a year and a half, and South Carolina needs you. So glad you're in Lexington.
Well, retirement was good for about 18 months. So.
Yeah, right. Was it your wife that pushed you out?
Exactly right.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly right.
Good to have you here again. Thank you for watching our program. If you have any comments or suggestions, we hope you will take time to make those on our website, carolinabusinessreview.org. Thank you for watching the program. Hope you have a good weekend. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.